Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk about every single trade that happened at the 2024 NBA trade deadline. It wasn't one of the more eventful deadlines in NBA history. We didn't have the Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant trades of like last year, Domantas Sabonis and Tyrese Haliburton a couple of years ago. Instead, it was a lot more low-key moves, but there were still some big moves to be made. A number of guys that got traded that could shift the title picture, a team that is rapidly rising up the Eastern Conference hierarchy over there in the New York Knicks, who we're going to talk about a lot in this video, and moves all over the place that could help teams be way more competitive than they've been the rest of the season. So definitely want to go ahead and break down all the trades. There may be a couple of minor things that I missed, but all the timestamps on this video, so if you want to hear my thoughts on a particular deal, you can go ahead and search through the video. But otherwise, let's go and get into it. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Let's talk about some trades. First things first, I've got to go ahead and talk about my Oklahoma City Thunder. There were a lot of questions about whether or not we were going to make a trade, and we did end up making a decently substantial one. The Thunder go ahead and in one of the first deals of today, land Gordon Hayward. In exchange, they send to Charlotte Tre Mann, Davis Bertans, Vasilije Micic, and some draft comp, a package that I, as a Thunder fan, am perfectly fine with giving up. Tre Mann, I think, has a lot of potential, and I'm really rooting for him in Charlotte, but with all the guys we have on our roster and the fact that we're competing now, there's just not enough time for him to get minutes to develop, to explore his game here over in Charlotte. I really hope he succeeds, and I think he's still got a bright future ahead of him. Davis Bertans was probably always going to be moved. He was the salary filler we had to use in any move. Vasilije Micic was playing pretty well for us. That's probably the biggest stinging factor of this deal, but ultimately, we do have a number of guards on this team still. We still have Shea, we've got Casey Wallace who can step up now, and this also opens minutes for guys like Aaron Wiggins, Kenrich Williams, so ultimately, I'm not too bothered. I didn't see what the draft comp was. I'm guessing it's probably like a second round pick or something, but we've got so many picks, it really doesn't matter to me. But on the other side of things, Gordon Hayward is huge for this team. He is going to fit perfectly into the scheme as a forward that can pass a little bit, he can rebound, he can handle the ball, hit a shot from basically anywhere on the court. Specifically, he's been a good three-point shooter his entire career, can knock it down from above the break, in the corner, wherever Shea or whoever hits him on catch-and-shoot opportunities is going to find him, he's probably going to go ahead and knock that shot down. Also, brings a little bit of veteran experience to this team. We have very few guys on this roster that have been to the playoffs before, and Gordon Hayward has been there a number of times, been on some deep playoff runs, and now comes and brings some of that experience over to Oklahoma City. He's also solid defensively, so he's not a guy that opposing teams can just consistently target on the defensive end. He's going to hold up really well on this team. I wouldn't be surprised if Gordon Hayward is closing a lot of games for the franchise. He is on an expiring deal, so if we want to bring him back, of course, we're going to have to re-sign him in the offseason. But even if we don't, if we just let him go, it opens up a lot of cap space for the Thunder to potentially make some big moves in the offseason. I think I saw a number that the Thunder are probably going to have around $50 million in cap space going into this summer. And we're not really a free agent destination, but to me, that shows that maybe we're looking to go out there and make that final big trade and just absorb a big contract into our salary space. Well, right now, Shea's still getting into his extension, but it's still nowhere near his value. J-Dub and Chet haven't been extended quite yet. This may be the perfect time to go ahead and strike and find that final piece. Giving ourselves a bunch of cap space and still having a bunch of draft picks to do so is huge. So for me, love this trade for the Thunder. I think he's going to be really good, big upgrade to our playoff rotation. And yeah, I've got no real complaints. I know a lot of Thunder fans want to see us add a big, but ultimately, this is kind of our play style right now. We like to go small, and that's part of the reason why we're so good offensively. We're going to have to see how we hold up, and there's still plenty of time to address the big man situation heading into the offseason. Next up, we've got maybe the biggest deal of the day with Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks going over to the New York Knicks in exchange for Quentin Grimes, Evan Fournier, Malachi Flynn, Ryan Arcidiacono, and 2 second-round picks. First, let's talk about it from the Pistons' perspective. I like it. I thought they were going to get a first-round pick for Bojan Bogdanovic. Ultimately, they don't. They get a bunch of salary filler guys. Malachi Flynn is still young. Interesting piece to pick up there. But the main piece for them is Quentin Grimes, who I really, really like. I think he's got a lot of potential still in the tank. It just really wasn't a fit over there in New York when they've got so many capable guys on the wings, especially with them adding Alec Burks. There was no reason for Quentin Grimes to remain there, so they trade him away, one of their better young pieces. But in exchange, they pick up 2 really good guys for this squad. This Knicks team has been incredible defensively ever since OG Anunoby came over to the squad, but the offense still felt like it needed a little bit of work, and they go ahead and add Bojan Bogdanovic, who's a 20-point-per-game capable scorer. Of course, he's not going to score that much over here in New York, but he's got the capability, can knock down shots from the perimeter, attack inside. He's not a great defender, but they've got so many guys around him that I don't think that's really going to be a problem at all. Like, this team is built on defense. They can go ahead and add one guy who's not a great defender to bolster that offense. Alec Burks, too, great great shooter out there on the wing, can handle the ball a little bit, can defend. He's played in New York before under Tom Thibodeau, so they've got a bit of familiarity there. I love this for the Knicks. With this trade, they may now be my second favorite in the Eastern Conference. Like, the Celtics are still my top team. They made some moves at the deadline too that I liked a lot. But this Knicks team has been rolling as of late. They've looked amazing, and they made maybe my favorite trade of the entire deadline with this one. Giving up Quentin Grimes is rough, but to add two pieces like this who can contribute in a big way, plus you didn't have to give up any of your first-round picks, so you still have so much available in your war chest. If a star player becomes available, salaries that you can go ahead and use to match that of a star player. The Knicks are an amazing spot. They've done a fantastic job over this past year or so to bolster this roster. They look amazing right now. I feel like they could end up in the Eastern Conference Finals, and they might not be done yet because this offseason still has big potential for them. So for me personally, they're maybe my biggest winner of the deadline. They did a fantastic job. Speaking of winners of the deadline, let's talk about the Mavericks. They went ahead and made two pretty substantial moves to go ahead and bolster their front court. PJ Washington gets sent over to Dallas in exchange for Grant Williams, Seth Curry, and a first-round pick. That's the first deal. And the second deal is Daniel Gafford to the Mavericks for a first over from Oklahoma City, in exchange sending them a first-round pick swap in 2028. And they also go ahead and send to the Wizards Richaun Holmes. Let's talk about the PJ Washington deal first. PJ is going to be a good fit for this Mavericks team. He can shoot, he can defend pretty well, does everything pretty solidly, and that's pretty much what they need in the front court. They just need some kind of stable presence there at the 4 spot. Grant Williams was supposed to be that guy, but he's been very underwhelming this season, fell out of the starting lineup, and has been getting inconsistent minutes because his shot's not been great. The defense hasn't really been there. He just hasn't been the guy I was hoping he would be when he signed over there to Dallas, so they grabbed someone more reliable in PJ Washington. I like that fit better. Give up Seth Curry, who really wasn't playing much for them anyways. Do have to give up a first-round pick, which is rough. The Mavericks don't have a lot of assets going forward, so you probably didn't want to have to give up this first, but I think PJ Washington's an upgrade. He's younger, and he's under contract for a little bit, so you've got a guy secured, and if he fits very well and helps you compete for a title, which is ultimately your goal, then I think this is perfectly fine. Then you've got the Gafford trade, which is also really big for them. Gafford is a great rim protector. He's a big rebound guy, amazing in terms of the pick and roll. He's going to be a great lob threat for Luka, who now has 2 of those guys after previously having none for years. They've got him, they've got Derek Lively, which is a great 1 and 2 at your big man spot. I think he's going to be fantastic for this team, and all they had to send out was Richaun Holmes, who wasn't very good. He wasn't playing that much for them anyways. Did have to send out a 2028 first-round pick swap to get the pick from OKC to make this deal, and that's a little bit scary because Luka Doncic is an unrestricted free agent in 2027, so if he walks, that pick could be really good going over to Oklahoma City, which is a Thunder fan I'm hype about, but ultimately, if you're the Mavericks, you've got to do whatever you can to build a great team around Luka so you don't have to think about him potentially walking in 2027, and I think Gafford and PJ Washington are big upgrades. The Mavericks got a lot better today, if you ask me, and ultimately, you've got to do that when you've got a player as talented as Luka on the roster. You've got to help him compete right now. They've been hovering around the play-in, but with these moves, I wouldn't be surprised if, they stay healthy, they're able to shoot up the standings. Probably the next biggest trade involves the Philadelphia 76ers, who went out there and added Buddy Hield, a guy who it feels like they've been rumored to want for a while now, and all they have to give up is Marcus Morris, Furkan Korkmaz, and 3 second-round picks. Marcus Morris eventually gets rerouted to San Antonio, and then eventually bought out, so he's a guy now on the buyout market. But Buddy Hield is great for this team. You talk about players that are ideal to put next to Embiid. One of the greatest three-point shooters of all time in Buddy Hield is exactly the type of guy that you want. He's going to go out there and just spot up on the perimeter, knock down shots consistently. Embiid gets doubled. You can't really double off of him, leaving Buddy Hield, so that makes him dangerous. They're just continuing to try and find ways to put shooters and reliable guys around Joel Embiid. I think Buddy Hield is an amazing addition. Not a great defender by any means, but they've got good defenders around him, and ultimately, I think it'll be perfectly fine. Next up, we've got a 3-teamer that involves Royce O'Neal and David Roddy going to the Phoenix Suns, and in exchange, they send Keita Bates-Diop, Jordan Goodwin, and 3 second-round picks to Brooklyn, as well as Yuta Watanabe and Chimezie Metu over to the Memphis Grizzlies. For the Phoenix Suns, I like the idea of adding Royce O'Neal a lot. He gives you a reliable role player on a team that doesn't have very many. There are some guys who are good in moments, but not many guys I would really trust in a playoff rotation. They needed to add some more depth, and Royce O'Neal gives them that, although they've got to give up a bunch of guys to make it happen. Their rotation is super thin. It's probably more reliable with Royce O'Neal there, and you could run a pretty solid 7-8 man rotation, but if there are injuries or one of these guys doesn't work out, they're in some trouble. Now, depth was already a problem, so it's probably good to add Royce O'Neal, but even still, it's still the big thing to keep an eye on for Phoenix. David Roddy is interesting to me. He's still relatively young, didn't do a lot over there in Memphis, but maybe now playing alongside a lot of talent with Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, and Kevin Durant, he'll be a lot better, so hopeful things work out for him there. Brooklyn lands 3 second-round picks, as well as 2 interesting pieces that they could maybe flip down the line if they wanted to, and then the Grizzlies add some maybe interesting pieces in Yuta Watanabe and Chimezie Metu, who I think could contribute in some way when Ja Morant returns next season. Next up is a trade that happened a day before the deadline, with Monte Morris going to the Minnesota Timberwolves for Shake Milton, Troy Brown Jr., and a 2030 second-round pick, all of which end up in Detroit. For the Detroit Pistons, I'm glad they rebuilt this thing from the ground up over the past couple of days. We're going to talk about a couple more smaller Pistons moves as we get down the line, but Shake Milton's still relatively young. You can give him a shot. Troy Brown Jr. was pretty good for the Wolves this season. I was surprised he didn't get more minutes. I know a lot of Wolves fans were sad they sent him out, and you get another second-round pick. I'm just glad the Pistons are shaking up what was a terrible roster. As for the Wolves, they really needed to add a spark plug off the bench, someone that can score as well as play make, and that's exactly what Monte Morris brings to the table. The big thing for them is he doesn't turn the ball over like at all, has consistently had one of the best assist to turnover ratios in the league, and that's great for a team that really struggles with turnovers. One of the main concerns I do have with this deal is that he's been injured for a majority of the season, has only played 6 games, and in those 6 games has really struggled over there with Detroit. Now, they didn't have a lot of talent over there, and also he's just coming off a big injury, so I wouldn't be surprised if he gets back to his old self over here in Minnesota, which was a great 3-point shooter, which helps them out a lot, gives them a little bit of offensive punch, can attack off the dribble too. In an ideal world, Monte Morris is a great pickup for them. We've just got to wait and see if he gets back to his pre-injury form from these past couple of seasons. Next, let's go ahead and talk about a couple of Celtics trades. They made some moves to improve on the edges. Jaden Springer lands in Boston for a second-round pick going over to Philly. Delano Banton goes over to the Blazers for a second-round pick, so basically just picking up one and sending one away. And then they pick up Xavier Tillman from the Memphis Grizzlies in exchange for Lamar Stevens and 2 second-round picks. So they sent out a couple of second-round picks. Lamar Stevens traded first-round picks, but end up with Jaden Springer and Xavier Tillman. Tillman in particular, I really like for this team. He's a fantastic defender at the big man spot. A little bit undersized compared to other bigs, but he plays way bigger than he is. The offensive game has really struggled this year, but he's shown some flashes in the past, and now he's going from a decimated Grizzlies team to maybe the best team in the league in the Boston Celtics, and they're not going to need him to do too much. He's just injury assurance. If they need somebody to go ahead and get a stop, Xavier Tillman can go ahead and do that. I like him as a potential force as well. If you face off against like Joel Embiid in the playoffs or Giannis, over there in the Bucks, I like the X pickup a lot. And then with Jaden Springer, taking a chance on a young guard for just a second-round pick who brings some defense to the table, and it's had some pretty fun flashes over in Philly, I think is great. I don't really know why the Sixers made that trade as much. I don't like that. As for the Grizzlies, they're trading away all their big men between, Xavier Tillman. They trade away Steven Adams around a week ago to the Houston Rockets. So I don't know what their game plan is with the big man spot. It seems like it's going to be addressed in the offseason, but for now, they seem to be speed running, trading away all their bigs. Speaking of Eastern Conference contenders, the Bucks go ahead and add a great, much-needed defensive piece in Patrick Beverley to their backup backcourt, and in exchange, the Sixers land Cameron Payne and a second-round pick. Kind of a confusing trade for me from the Sixers perspective. You're dealing with one of your biggest rivals, giving up a guy in Pat Bev who has been great for you defensively, pretty solid offensively, has felt like a great leader for them. I'm surprised they traded him away, especially again to a team like the Milwaukee Bucks who you're trying to compete with. To me, a move like this signals that they don't expect Embiid to be back this season and they're kind of just playing the long game. Well, meanwhile, a deal like the Buddy Hield one indicates to me that they want to be competitive now. They think Embiid is returning, so I don't know what's going on with them. It seems like they're also going to be big players in the buyout market, maybe adding like a Kyle Lowry. So maybe this is just clearing up money and space for a guy like him to play. As for the Bucks, they add a defensive player, a dog, a guy who's going to really get on the other guys on the roster if they're not defending. I think it's a mentality that they really needed to bring into this team, especially with how they've been struggling as of late under Doc Rivers. I think Pat Bev's going to be big for them, and I'm surprised they were able to land him. Next up, we had the Utah Jazz sending Kelly Olynyk and Ochai Agbaji over to Toronto for Kyra Lewis Jr., Otto Porter, and a 2024 first-round pick. From the Jazz perspective, I'm kind of surprised that they went ahead and made this deal. Agbaji, I like a lot. They didn't have a lot of minutes for him, and trading Olynyk and him away clears up minutes for Walker Kessler now, clears up minutes for Taylor Hendricks, who they took in the top 10. So ultimately, that was probably the goal of this move, and they do add a first-round pick in this year's draft. They don't get a lot in return, though, outside of that. Meanwhile, for the Raptors, I like Agbaji a lot for them as a pickup. A great wing player, a guy who can shoot, has some athleticism to him. I think he's got a lot of potential. In Olynyk, he is expiring after the season, but he's from Canada, and I think there's a good chance they can re-sign him. Plus, the 2024 first-round pick they gave up wasn't very valuable. It's probably going to be one of the later picks in the draft, coming from, it's like the least favorable of like Oklahoma City and LA and Utah, like all these teams, and OKC and LA are currently at the top of the West, so it doesn't really make sense to hold on to that pick that much. I think this is a good trade for them. They add some pieces that can both help now and help in the future, and they didn't have to give it too much for them. Speaking of the Raptors, they went ahead and traded Dennis Schroder and Thaddeus Young over to the Brooklyn Nets in exchange for Spencer Dinwiddie. They promptly cut Spencer Dinwiddie. He's going to be out there in the buyout market. The Lakers seem to be one of the top contenders to sign him among some other squads, and I think he'll probably be one of the most highly coveted players on that market. For the Raptors, to me, this feels like just clearing up space for other guys to play, getting off of some money. They send Dennis Schroder to the Brooklyn Nets, where he can probably play and now be maybe their starting point guard over there with Dinwiddie gone. Thaddeus Young immediately gets bought out too by the Brooklyn Nets, another guy that could be on the buyout market. So ultimately, this deal is kind of a wash. It's just Dennis Schroder landing in Brooklyn. Next, we've got the Pacers making a couple of moves that bring in some reunions. You get Doug McDermott back from the San Antonio Spurs in exchange for a second-round pick and Marcus Morris Sr., who again is now going to be out there in the buyout market. And you land Corey Joseph from the Golden State Warriors in exchange for a second-round pick. Just trading a couple seconds to try and fortify this rotation a little bit. Corey Joseph gives you a veteran presence in the backcourt if you need it, and Doug McDermott gives you another shooter in place of Buddy Hield just to continue to spread this offense out around Pascal Siakam as well as Tyrese Halliburton. Neither move is going to move the needle that much, but they already made their big move in the Siakam acquisition. This just bolsters their rotation for an interesting playoff run for this young team. We also saw Simone Fontecchio land with the Detroit Pistons yesterday in a trade that involved Kevin Knox, the draft rights of Gabriel Procida, and a second-round pick from the Wizards in 2024, which is probably going to be like the 32nd pick in the draft. So basically an end of the first-round pick for the Jazz, who again needed to clear up some rotational minutes for some of their young guys. But meanwhile, Simone is going to be pretty good for the Pistons. He's a versatile forward that can shoot very well. He can handle the ball a little bit, can defend, just gives the Pistons another good player, which they're definitely in need of, and they could probably re-sign him long-term for the future. Also in Pistons news, this wasn't technically a trade, but it did happen today. They cut Killian Hayes, taking him with a top 10 pick a few years ago. Hasn't worked out. He's actually started a number of games this year. Started their last game that they played, but there was a report that he and his camp wanted to change his scenery. I guess there are no trade offers out there for him on the market, so they went ahead and just cut him. They just let him go, which I guess I applaud them for, giving him what he wanted. We'll see what happens with Killian Hayes. Again, he was a top 10 pick not too long ago, so I would imagine he probably gets picked up by somebody. I just don't know where, and this may be the beginning of the end of his career. To go ahead and wrap up with some real minor trades, Robin Lopez gets dealt to the Kings for nothing, as far as I can see. The Clippers trade some cash for the draft rights to Ishmael Kamagate from the Nuggets. Don't know a lot about him, but interesting pickup nonetheless. And the Sixers trade Daniel House away to the Pistons along with a second-round pick to get a second-round pick back, just seeming to clear up some salary, take away some money for potentially picking up guys on the buyout market, and probably just trying to avoid the luxury tax. And that's basically every move that happened at the 2024 trade deadline. There were probably a couple of really small things that I missed here and there, but this is everything you really need to know. There weren't a lot of the big names move that we thought we might see. No Dejounte Murray trade. They're going to keep him into the offseason. We'll see what happens. No Zach LaVine trade, of course, with him being out for the season with an injury. That's not surprising. But no DeMar DeRozan trade, no Alex Caruso trade, no Drummond, anybody from the Bulls. And I'm going to talk a lot about that in a video upcoming here. I think I'm going to make a video talking about my biggest losers of the deadline, because there were some teams that I was really disappointed in, and the Bulls are one of those squads. No Kyle Kuzma being traded, no Lauri Markkanen. I didn't think that was going to happen, but he's not dealt. No Dorian Finney-Smith, no Mikal Bridges. A lot of guys didn't get dealt, and it seems like we're building up towards a really eventful offseason where a lot of these guys can get traded. A lot of teams are going to have some big-time salary space, so even though I'm sure a lot of you are disappointed in the trade deadline, I think the offseason is going to be great. Last year we had an amazing deadline and a great offseason leading into this year. I think this upcoming offseason could be a great one nonetheless. But for right now, let me know how you think your team did at this trade deadline. What would you grade them? Leave a like and subscribe down below if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. I appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.